Dr. Evelyn Reed was one of the most respected surgeons in the country, but on Flight 1109 she was just a black woman being told to move. The pilot, Captain Holloway, had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He thought he was putting her in her place. He didn't know that her son, sitting in seat 3C, was the one man who could end his career with a single flash of a badge. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin of Prestige Air Flight 1109 was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. The lighting was a soft, ambient champagne gold. The carpet was a plush, sound-dampening navy blue. The scent of warm nuts and expensive coffee hung in the climate-controlled air. Dr. Evelyn Reed settled into seat 2A, breathed it all in, and felt nothing. To her, this was not a luxury. It was a utility. She was flying from Atlanta to Chicago to perform a rare double-vessel coronary bypass on a high-profile patient. The first-class seat was a non-negotiable requirement from her surgical practice, ensuring she arrived rested, calm, and mentally prepared. She was a woman defined by precision. At 58, her hands were steady, her eyes sharp, and her mind a fortress of medical knowledge. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled into an elegant tight bun, and her simple tailored pantsuit spoke of quiet authority. She was reading a printed copy of The Lancet, her pen making neat microscopic notes in the margin. The boarding process, however, had already been a trial. It began at the gate. The gate agent, a woman in her late 30s with Sharon on her name badge and a severe blonde bob, had looked straight through Evelyn as she stood in the Priority 1 lane. "Ma'am, this line is for first class and diamond medallion only," Sharon Miller said, her voice dripping with forced politeness that failed to mask her implication. Evelyn, without looking up from her journal, simply slid her first-class boarding pass 2A across the scanner. The machine beeped its approval. Evelyn met the agent's gaze. "Will that be all, Sharon?" The agent's face tightened, a flash of pink rising in her cheeks. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." The ma'am was an insult, a verbal pat on the head. Evelyn walked down the jet bridge, the heavy, humid Atlanta air giving way to the plane's chilled interior. She was greeted by the lead flight attendant, Brenda, a woman with a smile that was bright but didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome aboard," Brenda chirped. "Good morning, all," Evelyn replied, stowing her carry-on with practiced efficiency. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt with a decisive click, and immediately returned to her article. She was an expert at building a wall around herself in these moments. It was a defense mechanism, honed over decades of being the only woman, the only black person, or both in rooms of power. A few minutes later, another passenger settled into seat 3C, just behind her and across the aisle. He was a tall, sharp-looking man in his early 30s, dressed in a suit that was clearly expensive but worn with the casualness of a uniform. He was on his phone, his voice low and serious. "No, I agree. The preliminary report on their maintenance logs is sloppy. We need to follow up." "Yes, I land at 11:05. I'll head straight to the regional office," he murmured. Evelyn heard the voice, and a small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. She waited until he'd clicked off his call, before she spoke, her voice low. "David, I thought you weren't flying out until tomorrow." David Reed looked up his professional mask, dissolving instantly into one of warmth and surprise. "Mum? What are you doing here? I thought you were flying to O'Hare next week for the conference." "The hospital moved up the surgery. A donor heart became available," she whispered back, her eyes sparkling. It seems we're on the same flight. Well, this is the best surprise I've had all month." David smiled. He was, as always, impressed by her. Here she was, calm as could be, on her way to literally hold a human heart in her hands. "Are you working?" she asked, gesturing to his suit and the somber briefcase at his feet. "Always, Mum. You know that. Just finishing up an audit in Atlanta. Now heading back to the Chicago office. Well, don't let me keep you from your work, but buy me dinner when we land, before I have to sequester at the hospital." "It's a date," David said, his smile mirroring hers. He put in his earbuds, and she returned to her journal. The familial warmth settled around them, a quiet, invisible shield. The cabin continued to fill. The passengers were the usual first-class mix, loud businessmen in wrinkled shirts already planning their first cocktail silent readers, and a young couple taking selfies. Then the last aboard were the Davenports. They were a storm of entitlement. Mr. Robert Davenport was loud, his face florid, his expensive polo shirt stretched taut over a paunch. His wife, Catherine, was thin-tanned and dripping in gold jewelry that clinked as she gesticulated. "This is unacceptable, Robert," Catherine announced to the cabin at large. "Seat 2B, and I'm in 4A. Why am I in 4A? I told your assistant to book them together." "I know, honey, I know," Robert boomed, flagging down Brenda, the flight attendant. "Ma'am, excuse me." "Flight attendant. We have a problem. My wife and I aren't seated together. You need to fix this." Brenda's professional smile was strained. "Sir, the flight is completely full. We can see if anyone is willing to move." "Well, someone has to move," Catherine snapped, tapping her manicured nails on the bulkhead. "We paid for first class. We expect first-class service." Brenda's eyes scanned the cabin. She first approached the man in 2B, a businessman who had already buried himself in spreadsheets. "Excuse me, sir. Would you be willing to move to 4A so this couple can sit together?" The man didn't even look up. "No." Brenda, flustered, looked at her passenger manifest. She conferred quietly with Sharon, the gate agent, who had just come aboard to finalize the passenger list. Sharon's eyes flicked past the white businessman in 2B and landed with a cold, calculating certainty on Dr. Evelyn Reed in 2A. Sharon approached Evelyn. "Ma'am, we have a small seating issue." Evelyn lowered her journal. "Yes. We need to move you. We have a couple who needs to sit together," Sharon said. It was not a request. Evelyn looked at the Davenports, who were staring at her impatiently, and then back at Sharon. "And where exactly would you be moving me?" "We have a lovely seat for you in Comfort Plus row 21. It has extra legroom," Sharon said, as if offering a prize. The entire cabin was quiet now. David Reed in 3C, slowly, almost imperceptibly, took out one earbud. "Row 21. Evelyn's voice was flat cold and devoid of emotion. "You are asking me to move from seat 2A, a first-class lie-flat seat that I paid for, to a middle seat in Comfort Plus." "It's not a middle seat." Sharon lied, her patience visibly thinning. "We just need this seat. They need to be together. It's a simple request." "And it's a simple answer. No," Evelyn said, raising her journal. "I am not moving. I am here to prepare for a surgical procedure. Now, if you'll excuse me." "Ma'am, you're holding up the flight," Sharon hissed, her face turning an eagerly shade of red. "This is ridiculous," Catherine Davenport shrieked. "Just make her move. What is the problem?" "I am not her." Evelyn stated, her voice rising just enough to cut through the cabin. "I am Dr. Reed, and I am a ticketed first-class passenger in seat 2A. I will not be moving." Sharon, clearly out of her depth and infuriated at being challenged, turned on her heel. "I'm getting the captain." David Reed's eyes narrowed. He watched Sharon march to the cockpit and knock. The door opened, and she disappeared inside. When she re-emerged, she was followed by a tall man with a commanding presence and a face set in a permanent scowl of annoyance. He wore the 4 stripes of a captain on his shoulders. This was Captain Marcus Holloway. And he was not in the mood. Captain Marcus Holloway was a man who believed in a chain of command. He had been a pilot in the Air Force for 20 years before transitioning to commercial aviation. In his mind, his cockpit was a command center, and the airplane from nose to tail was his domain. Passengers were cargo, and flight attendants were his subordinates. He had no patience for customer service issues, especially when they delayed his departure time. He had been briefed by Sharon in 2 sentences. "There's a woman in 2A who is refusing to move for the Davenports. She's holding up the flight." That was all he needed to know. He didn't ask why she was being asked to move. He didn't ask if she was the only one asked. He saw a problem, and a simple solution: remove the problem. He strode out of the cockpit, his heavy pilot's bag still slung over one shoulder. He didn't glance at the Davenports, who were watching him with expectant, triumphant expressions. He didn't look at the other passengers. He walked directly to seat 2A and stood over Dr. Evelyn Reed, deliberately using his height to intimidate her. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Holloway. This is my aircraft." He began, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "I understand you're refusing a crew instruction." Evelyn Reed met his gaze. She was not intimidated. She had faced down arrogant male colleagues, terrified families, and death itself on the operating table. A grumpy pilot held no terror for her. "Captain," she said, her voice a model of professional calm, "I have not refused a crew instruction. I have declined a request from a gate agent to surrender my paid, ticketed first-class seat and be downgraded to row 21, all to accommodate these passengers." She gestured calmly toward the Davenports. Holloway's eyes hardened. He despised being challenged, especially by a passenger, and especially by this one. In his mind, she didn't look like she belonged in 2A. He made a snap judgment, one poisoned by years of unexamined bias. "That's not what I was told," he said, his voice dropping. "I was told we have a weight and balance issue, and we need to move a passenger. You've been selected." This was a new, more serious lie, and a stupid one. The cabin grew even colder. In 3C, David Reed's hand moved to the inside pocket of his jacket, his fingers brushing against a small leather wallet. He didn't move. He just watched. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "A weight and balance issue, Captain." For a single passenger moving from row 2 to row 21 on a 757. As a woman of science, I find that claim mathematically fascinating. "Would you care to show me the manifest calculations that require me specifically to move?" Holloway's face went from annoyed to thunderous. He had been called on his lie, and by a black woman who had the audacity to question him with intelligence. His veneer of professionalism evaporated, revealing the raw bigotry beneath. "Listen," he growled, leaning down, his voice now, a low, menacing hiss meant only for her, but loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "I don't know who you think you are, and I don't have time to argue about it. Some people just aren't used to this cabin and its courtesies. It's a simple request. Be a team player. The insult hung in the air, thick and toxic. Some people. Not used to this. Evelyn Reed recoiled, not in fear, but in disgust, the casual, venomous racism of it. Captain, I am used to this cabin. I am also used to professionals, and you are not behaving like one. You are behaving like a bully. You are discriminating against me. That's it, Holloway snapped, straightening up, his face red. He was done. He had been defied. He would assert his dominance. He pointed a thick finger at her. Ma'am, I am the captain of this aircraft, and my word is law here. I am giving you a direct, final order. You will take the new boarding pass that Ms. Miller is holding, and you will move to the back of the plane. Now. Sharon Miller stepped forward, holding out the flimsy paper pass for seat 21B. A middle seat. Evelyn stared at the paper as if it were a piece of trash. She slowly, deliberately turned her head back to Holloway. And if I refuse this direct order, which is based on a lie and motivated by prejudice, Holloway's smile was a terrifying, triumphant sneer. He had her. Then you are in violation of federal law. You are non-compliant, and I will have you removed from my aircraft. Brenda. He barked at the flight attendant. Call airport security. Have this passenger removed for non-compliance with a crew directive. Brenda, who had been watching with growing horror, fumbled for her handheld device. The Davenports looked on Mrs. Davenport with a smug, satisfied smirk. Mr. Davenport just looked impatient, as if swatting a fly. The other passengers in first class suddenly found the safety manual intensely interesting. No one spoke. No one intervened. This was Evelyn's humiliation, and hers alone. You are making a terrible mistake, Captain, Evelyn said, her voice low and shaking. Not with fear, but with a profound, seismic anger. The only mistake, Holloway shot back, was you thinking you could argue with me. Brenda was about to tap the button to call for security. That won't be necessary. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the cabin like a surgeon's scalpel. It was cold, precise, and absolutely brimming with an authority that dwarfed the captain's. Every head turned. David Reed was standing in the aisle next to seat 3C. He had his phone in his left-hand screen, dark, but held as if it had been recording. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. He was looking directly at Captain Marcus Holloway. Holloway, incensed by another interruption, rounded on him. Who the hell are you? Sit down. This is a crew matter, and you are interfering. I'm David Reed, the man said, taking 1, 2, 3 measured steps forward, closing the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of the pilot, close enough that Holloway could see the icy calm in his eyes. And this, David said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, is not a crew matter. This is a federal matter. His right hand moved to the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He slowly, deliberately pulled out a black bifold leather wallet. He didn't flash it. He opened it and held it steady, inches from Captain Holloway's face. Inside, gleaming under the soft cabin light, was a gold badge. A shield embossed with an eagle and the scales of justice. And next to it, a photo ID card. Federal Aviation Administration. David Reed, said his voice, flat. Office of Civil Rights and Investigations. Lead investigator. And that woman, that doctor, you just ordered to the back of the plane. That's Dr. Evelyn Reed. She's my mother. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And you, Captain Holloway, have just violated Title 49 of the United States Code, prohibiting discrimination by an air carrier. and you did it in front of a federal investigator. So if you'd like to call security, please do. I'll need them to take your statement." The silence that fell over the first-class cabin was no longer awkward. It was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum being created of all the air, all the bravado, all the entitlement being sucked out of Marcus Holloway. The captain's florid, angry face went pale. He didn't just look surprised. He looked like he had been physically struck. His eyes darted from the badge to David's face, to Evelyn, and back to the badge. He knew exactly what that badge meant. It meant investigations. It meant fines that could cripple an airline. And for him, personally, it meant his license. Brenda, the flight attendant, had her hand frozen over her device, her eyes wide with terror. Sharon Miller. The gate agent let the flimsy boarding pass for 21B flutter from her fingers to the floor. The Davenports in the aisle were statues of disbelief. Catherine Davenport's smug expression had been replaced by a slack-jawed, fish-like gape. Holloway was the first to find his voice, or at least a weak, stammering facsimile of it. This is a misunderstanding, Mr. Reed," he sputtered, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "A simple seating issue. A miscommunication." David Reed did not smile back. His expression remained one of cold, righteous fury. "A misunderstanding. Let's review the facts, shall we? You were called to resolve a seating preference for Mr. and Mrs. Davenport. You did not ask the passenger in 2B to move again. You did not ask the passenger in 3A. You came directly to Dr. Reed, the only black woman in this cabin. That's not a misunderstanding, Captain. That's a pattern." Holloway's eyes darted around, looking for an ally. He found none. The other passengers were now staring their fear of involvement, replaced by a rabid curiosity. One passenger in 4B, a young man, was now openly filming with his smartphone. I was told there was a weight and balance issue." Holloway tried grasping at his own lie. "That was your worst mistake," David said, his voice like ice. "Because and I'm sure my mother are now formally requesting a full review of your flight log and weight manifest for Flight 1109. Falsifying a safety report, especially a weight and balance claim to enforce a discriminatory order, is a separate and frankly career-ending federal violation. You have not only broken civil rights law, Captain, you have compromised the integrity of this entire flight deck." Holloway began to sweat. The starched white collar of his pilot's shirt suddenly looked soaking wet and tight. David then turned his gaze, and it was like a spotlight on Sharon Miller. "And you, Ms. Miller. Your behavior at the gate was noted. This line is for first class only. Your microaggressions, your immediate escalation to the captain instead of de-escalating the situation with the Davenports. Your complicity is logged. You will also be part of my report." Sharon, who had been trying to blend into the bulkhead, let out a small, strangled sound. He wasn't done. He looked at Brenda, whose hand was still trembling. "And you. You were about to call security on a calm, non-threatening, fully ticketed first-class passenger. Based on what the captain's illegal order, I'd advise you to think very, very carefully about your next action." Brenda snatched her hand back from her device as if it were on fire. "No, I mean, I was just—" Finally, David Reed's gaze fell upon the Davenports, Robert and Catherine. They had started to back away, trying to melt into the galley. "And you two," David said, his voice projecting through the cabin. Your entitled, disruptive behavior created this incident. You pressured the crew, you encouraged this action, and you stood by and smirked, while another passenger was humiliated. Your names will be in my report for passenger interference. Now I suggest you find your assigned seats A and 2B, and you sit in them. And you do not say another word for the duration of this flight. Am I clear? Mr. Davenport, a man who was clearly used to yelling at subordinates, could only nod, his face pale. Yes. Yes, of course. His wife Catherine looked as if she was going to be sick. They scrambled to their seats, Robert squeezing past Evelyn to get to 2B, refusing to make eye contact. The cabin was now David's. The power had shifted completely and irrevocably. Holloway, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, tried one last desperate appeal. He turned to Evelyn. His entire demeanor changed. He was no longer a captain. He was a beggar. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice slick with false sincerity. "Please, I apologize. I was stressed. The flight is delayed. I misjudged the situation. Deeply. Please, of course, this is your seat. Can I get you a drink? A glass of champagne? We can all just put this behind us, Mr. Reed. Sir, as a professional courtesy." He was appealing to David man to man. Professional to professional, hoping to sweep the messy business of his mother's humiliation under the rug. He had once again misjudged the situation. David looked at Holloway with a profound, cold pity. "A professional courtesy, Captain. You are confusing me with a colleague. I am not your colleague. I am your regulator. And you just threatened my mother." He turned to Evelyn, his voice softening for the first time. "Mom, are you okay?" Evelyn Reed let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 30 years. She looked at her son, and her eyes were filled with a fierce, burning pride. She nodded, her composure absolute. "I'm fine, David. Thank you." She then looked at Captain Holloway, her gaze steady. "Captain, your apology is not accepted, because it is not sincere. It is an act of self-preservation. You were not stressed. You were racist. And you were abusive. And you are not fit to fly this plane." David nodded, as if confirming a diagnosis. "My mother is correct." He turned back to the pilot. "We are not putting this behind us, Captain Holloway. In fact, we are just getting started. As an authorized representative of the Federal Aviation Administration, and citing your clear and present violation of Title 49, as well as your admission to falsifying a safety log, I am officially grounding you. You are relieved of command. You will not fly this aircraft. You will gather your personal belongings from the cockpit, and you will deplane. Immediately." "You can't do that." Holloway's voice was a desperate, cracking plea. The last vestiges of his authority were dissolving, and he was thrashing. "I'm the captain in command. You don't have the authority to ground me. Only the airline can do that." "You're wrong." David stated, his voice flat and educational, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "The FAA has oversight over all airmen. And as a field investigator, I have the authority to issue an emergency grounding order for any pilot who demonstrates reckless, unsafe, or discriminatory behavior. And you, sir, have hit the trifecta. You created a hostile safety environment. You lied about a safety protocol, and you did it all to enforce a bigoted personal preference. You are a liability." Holloway looked past David to the cockpit. His first officer, A younger man named Ben had cracked the door and was watching the entire exchange, his face ashen. Holloway looked at him as if for support. "Ben, tell him we have a flight to run." The first officer just shook his head slowly, his eyes wide, and took a half step back into the cockpit. He was not going to tie his career to this sinking ship. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Captain Holloway, you have two choices. You can deplane on your own right now, or I can make a call to the airport police and the head of the FAA's Chicago regional office, my boss, and have them meet you at the gate. In that case, you will be deplaning in handcuffs for interfering with a federal investigator. The choice is yours, but you will be deplaning." The finality of it hit Holloway like a physical blow. He stared at David, his mind racing, searching for an escape, a loophole, a way out. He found nothing but the cold, hard wall of the law personified by the man standing in front of him. His shoulders, which had been puffed with arrogance, slumped in utter defeat. The man who had strode out of the cockpit 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a grey, shaking, terrified shell. "Fine," he whispered. It was the sound of a career ending. He turned wordlessly and reached into the cockpit. The first officer flinched away from him. Holloway grabbed his cap and his heavy flight bag. He didn't look at the first officer. He didn't look at Brenda or Sharon. He didn't look at David. His eyes, however, were drawn as if by a magnet to Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was watching him. Her expression was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was one of a deep, profound, and weary sadness. She looked at him as she might look at a malignant excised tumor, something that had to be removed. That look was worse than any hatred. It was the look of dismissal. Holloway's face contorted in a final spasm of humiliated rage. He turned and began the long walk. Down the first-class aisle, past the businessman in 2B, who was now staring past David in 3C, past the passenger in 4B, who was still silently filming his disgrace. He walked through the curtain into the economy cabin, where passengers were still stowing their bags, oblivious. He walked all the way down the aisle, the 100-yard walk of shame, and disappeared out the main cabin door, not even glancing at the gate agents. As soon as he was gone, Sharon Miller seemed to awaken from her trance. "Oh my God," she whimpered, and she too turned and fled up the jet bridge. The cabin was turbulent for a moment. Then David Reed spoke to the terrified first officer, who was still peering out of the cockpit. "First officer, what's your name?" "Ben. Ben Carter, sir." "First Officer Carter, your captain has been relieved of duty. You are now in command of this aircraft until a replacement captain arrives. Is that understood?" "Sir, yes, sir," Carter stammered. "Good. Now I need you to make 2 calls. First to your operations center. Inform them that Captain Holloway has been grounded by the FAA, and they need to send a replacement pilot for flight 109 immediately. Second, I need you to contact the Prestige Air Ground Operations Manager, Mr. Harrison, I believe, and have him meet me at the gate. Immediately." "Yes, sir. Right away." The cockpit door clicked shut. David turned to Brenda, the flight attendant, who was visibly trembling. "Brenda, you can make your announcement now. Not about security, about the delay." Brenda nodded, her voice shaking as she picked up the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, attention please. We have an unexpected crew change this morning. It seems there will be a delay. We apologize for the inconvenience and will have an update for you as soon as possible." The economy cabin groaned. The first-class cabin remained utterly silent. David Reed finally let out a long breath. The tension flowed out of his shoulders. He turned and sat down on the armrest of his mother's seat 2A. "Mom," he said, his voice now just the voice of a son. "Are you really okay?" Evelyn reached up and placed her hand on his. Her hand was perfectly steady. "I am now, David. I am now." She looked at him, her gaze traveling from his worried eyes to the badge which he still held in his other hand. "Your father. He would be so proud of you." "I know," David said quietly. "That's why I do this." He was about to say more when his own cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was an official number from DC. He stood up, a flicker of professional duty returning. "Excuse me, Mom. I have to take this." He stepped into the galley, his voice low. "Reed speaking." "Yes, Mr. Director. Yes, I'm in Atlanta on the ground." "What, you're kidding me?" He was quiet for a long moment, listening. Evelyn watched him, her brow furrowed. David's face grew grim. "Sir," he said, "you are not going to believe this. The anonymous complaints you just received about a rogue pilot with a race bias on the ATL-ORD route. The ones against a Captain Marcus Holloway." "Yes, sir. I'm on his plane right now, and I have to tell you, I have a brand new incident report, and this one isn't anonymous." The half hour that followed was a blur of quiet, intense activity. First Officer Ben Carter, now effectively the acting captain, was on the radio in the cockpit, his voice a low, stressed monotone as he explained to a doubtlessly apoplectic operations manager what had just transpired. In the galley, David Reed paced his phone to his ear, providing a calm, detailed, and legally precise account of the incident to the FAA's National Director of Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. "Yes, sir." He explicitly used the phrase, "Some people aren't used to this cabin." Correct. He then fabricated a weight and balance claim to enforce the order. "Yes, I have it on video. A passenger in 4B was also recording. I have already informed him he is grounded pending investigation. I will file the full report the moment I land." "Understood. I will coordinate with the regional office." He hung up and immediately made another call. The passengers in first class spoke in hushed whispers, stealing glances at Dr. Reed. She had, with impeccable composure, reopened her medical journal. She was refusing to be a spectacle. She was a professional waiting to fly to her job. Her calmness seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. The businessman in 2B, Mr. Davenport's new seatmate, leaned over. "Ma'am, Dr. Reed, I want to apologize. I should have said something. That was unbelievable." Evelyn looked up, her eyes clear. "Thank you. But the time to say something is when it's happening, not after." The man flinched but nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right. I'm sorry." Meanwhile, Robert and Catherine Davenport sat in their separate seats, 2B and 4A, in rigid silence. Catherine was visibly weeping, her shoulders shaking, but she was making no sound. The consequences of her entitled outburst had spiraled so far beyond her control that she was, for the first time in her life, truly terrified. A new figure appeared at the jet bridge door. He was a man in a crisp suit, his face pale and harried, his Prestige Air ID bouncing on his lanyard. This was Mr. Harrison, the Atlanta station manager. He saw David Reed in the galley and hurried toward him. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice low and breathless. "I'm Thomas Harrison, the station manager. I just got off the phone with our corporate VP." What on earth happened here? David gestured for him to step further into the galley away from the passengers. What happened, Mr. Harrison, is that your captain, Marcus Holloway, and your gate agent, Sharon Miller, conspired to illegally downgrade and humiliate a black first-class passenger, Dr. Evelyn Reed, based on their racial bias. I understand there was a seating dispute. There was no dispute. David cut him off, his voice sharp. There was a request from the Davenports and a decision by your staff to resolve it by targeting Dr. Reed. When she lawfully refused to be downgraded, your captain lied about a safety procedure and threatened her with arrest. He is a disgrace to his uniform, and as of 20 minutes ago, he is grounded. Harrison looked like he was going to be sick. Oh my God. Our VP is on a plane, but he said to offer Dr. Reed anything. A full refund, 100,000 miles, a flight voucher for Mr. Harrison. David said, this is not a voucher situation. This is a federal investigation. You have a systemic problem at this station. I will be speaking with your corporate counsel before the end of the day. What you can do right now is get a new captain on this plane, and you can find Ms. Sharon Miller. She is a material witness, and she is not to leave this airport. Yes, of course. A new captain is on his way from the employee lot now. He'll be here in 10 minutes, and I'll find Sharon. Harrison looked past David at Dr. Reed, who was still pointedly reading her journal. He took a step toward her, intending to apologize, but David put a hand on his arm. Don't, David said quietly. You have nothing to say to her. Your airline already said it all. Just fix the problem. Get this plane in the air. Harrison chastened nodded and retreated up the jet bridge. The cockpit door opened. The new captain arrived, a stark contrast to Holloway. He was an older man with a kind, weary face. He came straight from the cockpit to seat 2A, kneeling in the aisle. Dr. Reed, he said, his voice gentle. Ma'am, my name is Captain George Wright. I'm your new pilot. I've been briefed on the situation. And on behalf of the decent pilots at this airline, I want to personally and humbly apologize. What you experienced it's unacceptable. It's monstrous. My job now is to get you to Chicago safely, and with the dignity you should have been afforded from the start. We will be airborne in 15 minutes. Evelyn looked at him. She saw the genuine shame and empathy in his eyes. This was the first sincere apology she had received. Thank you, Captain Wright, she said, closing her journal. I appreciate that. Is there anything at all I can get for you? Just get me to Chicago, please. I have a patient waiting. Yes, ma'am, he said, standing. He nodded respectfully to David. Mr. Reed? Captain. David nodded back. As Captain Wright entered the cockpit, the plane's door was finally sealed. The jet bridge pulled away. The flight at last was underway. David returned to his seat in 3C. As the plane pushed back from the gate, his mother turned in her seat. They couldn't talk, but their eyes met. She gave him a small, exhausted smile. He returned it with a look of fierce, protective love. The flight itself was uneventful, at least on the surface. The new crew was exemplary. They were deferential to Dr. Reed to an almost comical degree, refilling her water before it was half empty, offering her snacks, and apologizing for the delay every time they passed. Evelyn remained polite, but distant. She was working, preparing her mind for the task ahead. David, meanwhile, was also working. His laptop was open, his fingers flying across the keys as he typed his report. He was meticulous. He noted the time of every microaggression. He quoted Holloway's words verbatim. Some people aren't used to this cabin. He quoted the fabricated safety of flight lie, a weight and balance issue. He noted the complicity of Sharon, the intimidation by Brenda, and the instigation by the Davenports. He attached the video file from the passenger in 4B, who had emailed it to him, and the file from his own phone. He was not just writing a report. He was building a case. The term hard karma implies a swift, righteous, and proportional cosmic justice. What happened to Marcus Holloway, Sharon Miller, and the Davenports was something more precise. It was administrative, legal, and systemic. It was karma delivered not by fate, but by the federal government. For Captain Marcus Holloway, his walk of shame did not end at the gate. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, he was met not just by the panicked station manager, Mr. Harrison, but by two grim-faced men in dark suits. One was the FAA regional director, David's boss's boss, who had been at the airport for a separate matter. The other was the airline's own chief pilot for the Atlanta base. "Marcus," the chief pilot said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "Hand me your badge and your wings." "What, Rick, you can't be serious. It was a misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding is that you're still employed," the chief pilot snapped. "I just got off the phone with our VP of Flight Ops, who was on a call with the FAA director in DC. You fabricated a safety report. You abused a passenger. And you did it all in front of an FAA investigator. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will be escorted off the premises." Holloway's emergency grounding by David was just the beginning. The full investigation, spearheaded by David's report, was swift and brutal. The video evidence was irrefutable. His history was pulled. It turned out, as David's boss had hinted, that there were 3 prior anonymous complaints against Holloway for similar behavior toward minority passengers, all of which had been dismissed as he said, she said by local managers. David's report was the nail in the coffin. Within 2 weeks, Captain Marcus Holloway's pilot's license was suspended by the FAA for a period of 18 months for conduct unbecoming an airman and deliberate falsification of flight safety documentation. Prestige Air, facing a massive lawsuit and an FAA audit, terminated his employment for cause, voiding his severance and pension. He was disgraced, unemployable, as a commercial pilot and facing potential civil charges. For Sharon Miller, the gate agent, Mr. Harrison found her hiding in a staff break room, crying. Her tears did not save her. She was immediately suspended. Her employment history also showed a pattern. She had on numerous occasions involuntarily downgraded non-white passengers from oversold first-class cabins while allowing white passengers with lower tier status to remain. She had been gaming the system, assuming no one would ever have the power to call her out. She was fired within 48 hours. The report noted her actions not only violated company policy, but also federal anti-discrimination law, making her a massive liability. For Robert and Catherine Davenport, while they were not employees, they did not escape. David's report named them as disruptive passengers who had instigated a conflict leading to a safety of flight violation. Prestige Air immediately flagged their loyalty accounts. They were banned for life from flying Prestige Air. Furthermore, their names were shared on an inter-airline security database, meaning they would face enhanced security screening and be barred from first class on multiple other carriers. Their desire to sit together cost them their privilege. For Prestige Air, this was the hardest karma of all. David's report triggered a full-scale FAA audit of Prestige Air's Atlanta and Chicago hubs. The investigation went far beyond one pilot. It became an inquiry into the airline's culture. The result was a consent decree, a settlement to avoid $1 billion federal lawsuit. Prestige Air was fined $5.2 million by the Department of Justice. But the real penalty was the one Dr. Evelyn Reed herself had demanded. When the airline's CEO finally reached her a week after her successful surgery, she did not ask for money or miles. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice clear over the phone from her Chicago hotel. "I don't want your vouchers. I want your company. I want you to fix it. I want mandatory top-down bias and de-escalation training. Not a 20-minute webinar. I mean a full accredited ongoing program for every single employee, from the gate agent to the CEO, especially your pilots." Faced with the alternative, a public reputation-destroying lawsuit led by the FAA's Civil Rights Office, the CEO agreed. The Dr. Evelyn Reed Protocol, as it became known within the company, was implemented 6 months later. It was a rigorous scenario-based training program on implicit bias and passenger rights designed and overseen in part by David Reed's own FAA department. Captain Holloway's bigotry didn't just end his own career. It forced an entire corporation to confront its own. As Flight 1109, now piloted by Captain George Wright, began its smooth descent into Chicago O'Hare, the cabin was peaceful. The sun was high and the turbulence of the morning had given way to a calm, clear sky. When the plane parked at the gate, Captain Wright came on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize once again for our significant delay in Atlanta. We are on the ground in Chicago. For those connecting ground staff, we'll be at the gate to assist you. And for all of us at Prestige Air, we thank you for your patience." The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. As the passengers began to stand and gather their bags, Captain Wright and the First Officer Ben Carter both came out of the cockpit. They stood in the aisle, deliberately blocking the other passengers from deplaning. Captain Wright addressed the cabin. "Folks, if you'd just give us one more moment. Dr. Reed, on behalf of the crew, we'd like you to be the first to deplane." Evelyn looked up, surprised. The other passengers, including the humbled businessman in 2B, all nodded and stepped back. "Thank you, Captain," she said. She gathered her bag and her journal. David stepped out and waited for her. As she walked past the cockpit, Captain Wright and First Officer Carter both nodded to her. "Dr. Reed, it was an honor to fly you." "Thank you, gentlemen. You handled this well," she replied. Evelyn and David stepped into the jet bridge together. As they walked, the adrenaline from the incident, which had been replaced by the focused calm for her surgery, and his report finally drained away, leaving them both exhausted. "So," Evelyn said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "That was a morning." David chuckled a dry, tired sound. "You could say that. You were amazing, Mom. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't back down. You just held your ground." "It's what we do, David," she said. "It's what I taught you to do. You just do it with a badge." "It's what Dad taught us," he corrected gently. His father, a brilliant lawyer who had passed a decade prior, had been the son of a Tuskegee airman. He had regaled David with stories of men who flew for a country that wouldn't let them sit at a lunch counter. The fight for justice in the skies was literally in David's blood. This wasn't just a job for him. It was a legacy. They reached the end of the jet bridge and entered the bustling terminal at O'Hare. Standing there waiting for them was a man in an expensive suit, looking far more anxious than the typical limo driver. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Reed," he said, stepping forward. "Yes," Evelyn said. I'm Stephen Collins, Vice President of Operations for Prestige Air Chicago. He had clearly been sent to do damage control. Dr. Reed, on behalf of our entire airline from the CEO down, I cannot. I do not have the words to express our profound apology. Evelyn Reed held up a hand. Mr. Collins, your station manager in Atlanta offered me miles. Your CEO will likely offer me money. I will tell you what I'm going to tell him. I don't want your compensation. I want your compliance. I want you to fix your company. Collins was taken aback. Ma'am? Yes. Of course. Whatever you... My son. Evelyn continued gesturing to David. We'll be in touch with your legal department. He will be outlining a list of mandatory, non-negotiable changes to your training protocols. You will implement them, because if you don't, this won't be a report on his desk. It will be a lawsuit on yours. David looked at the VP. And Mr. Collins, my office will be auditing this hub for the next 18 months. I'd get your house in order. We'll be in touch. The Vice President, a man who managed thousands of employees, just nodded, pale and silent. Evelyn and David walked past him into the terminal. They were just a mother and son walking side by side. A healer on her way to save a life, and a protector on his way to change a system. The pilot had tried to send her to the back of the plane. Instead, he had just launched her and her son straight to the front of the fight. In the end, Captain Holloway's prejudice cost him everything: his job, his license, and his reputation. But the real karma wasn't just his downfall. It was Dr. Reed's victory. Because of her courage and her son's power, an entire airline was forced to change. The Dr. Evelyn Reed protocol is now part of their training, a permanent reminder that you never ever know who you are talking to. This is a real-life story of how dignity and authority can and must win against discrimination. We see these stories every day. If you believe that justice should always be served and that karma is real, then please like this video and share it with someone who needs to see it. It helps our channel more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single story of karma and justice being served.